Last time, Elise walked into the most important interview of her career and found the man from the night before sitting at the head of the table. She kept it together. Barely. He was professional. So was she. But before she even made it off the sidewalk, he texted her. And she didn't delete it. Now it's been 3 days. No callback from HR. No follow-up from him. Just that message sitting in her phone like a question she doesn't know how to answer. She told herself it was one night. She told herself it was complicated. She told herself a lot of things. But here's what she didn't tell herself. What happens when he calls? And he does. If you're back for part 2, welcome. Drop a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. This story is just getting started. Let's go. 3 days is a long time to stare at a text message. I'd drafted a reply maybe 6 times, deleted every single one. Too casual, too formal, too much, not enough. At some point, I stopped trying and just let it sit there, which felt like its own kind of answer. On Wednesday morning, HR called. The woman on the phone was warm and efficient and told me they'd like to move forward, that the team had been impressed, that the offer would be sent over by end of week. I thanked her, hung up, and sat on my kitchen floor for approximately 90 seconds, processing the fact that I'd actually gotten it. The job was real, which meant the complication was real too. I reported for my first day on a Thursday. New badge, new desk, new email signature. The office was exactly as I remembered it from the interview. Clean, focused, the kind of place where people moved with purpose. My direct manager was a woman named Sandra, sharp and straightforward, who spent the first morning walking me through the team structure and what the first 30 days would look like. Tyler's name came up twice in that conversation, both times in the context of company leadership, both times completely unremarkable. Sandra didn't know. Why would she? I settled in. I was good at starting over. I'd had enough practice. By the end of the first week, I knew the rhythms of the floor, had lunch with 2 people from the strategy team, and had successfully avoided any direct interaction with Tyler beyond a brief hallway moment on day 2, where we exchanged the kind of nod that colleagues exchange, and absolutely nothing else. It was fine. It was completely fine. On Friday afternoon, an email came through. Internal, formal. My name in the to line along with 4 others. A note from Tyler's assistant, scheduling a team strategy review for the following Tuesday. Standard. Routine. I read it twice anyway. The meeting came and went without incident. He ran it efficiently, asked pointed questions, moved through the agenda without wasting anyone's time. I contributed twice. He responded to both points with the same measured attention he gave everyone else in the room. Professional. Entirely appropriate. Afterward, as people were filing out, he said, without looking up from his notes, "Monroe, a minute." The others left. The door stayed open, which I appreciated. He closed his folder and looked at me directly for the first time since the interview. "How's the first week been?" The question was simple. His expression was not. There was something underneath it. Careful, restrained. The same thing I'd seen in flashes before. And I realized he was doing the same thing I was. Holding something at arm's length and pretending the effort wasn't showing. "Good," I said. "Exactly what I was hoping for." He nodded slowly. A beat passed. "I'm glad," he said. And he meant more than the job, and we both knew it. He looked like he was about to say something else. Instead, he picked up his folder and said, "Have a good weekend, Elise." I walked out and spent the entire elevator ride telling myself that the way he'd said my name just then meant absolutely nothing. I almost believed it. The second week was easier than the first. Or maybe I just got better at the performance. I threw myself into the work, which wasn't difficult because the work was actually good. Real problems, real stakes, the kind of projects that required enough focus to crowd out everything else. I stayed late twice, not to impress anyone, just because I was in the middle of something and stopping felt wrong. Sandra noticed. She mentioned it in passing on Wednesday, something about being glad to have someone on the team who didn't watch the clock, and I smiled and said I was enjoying it, which was true. What was also true was that staying late meant the floor got quiet, and quiet meant less management of where my eyes went and what I let myself think about. Tyler worked late too. I knew this not because I was paying attention. I was paying attention. His office was at the far end of the floor, glass-fronted, and when the overhead lights dimmed automatically at 7, the glow from inside stayed on. I never walked past it. I was very deliberate about that. On Thursday, he appeared at my desk at 5:45. The floor was mostly empty. He stood at a reasonable distance, hands in his pockets, and said he'd read the preliminary brief I'd submitted on the Hartwell account and wanted to talk through a few things. We sat in the small conference room off the main hall for 40 minutes. It was entirely professional. He had notes. I had context he needed. We went back and forth in the easy, efficient way that happens when two people think similarly and neither of them is performing. At one point, we reached for the same printed page, and his hand stopped just short of mine. A half second, nothing more. And he pulled back and let me take it. Neither of us acknowledged it. But the temperature in that room shifted in a way that had nothing to do with the building's heating system, and we both felt it. And we both kept talking about the Hartwell account, like adults. When we were done, he gathered his notes and said the brief was strong, that he had one structural suggestion he'd send over in the morning. I said that worked. He stood, and then, at the door, he paused with his back half turned and said, "Are you happy here, Elise? Honestly." It caught me off guard. Not the question itself, but the way he asked it. Quiet, genuine, stripped of the professional coding he wore so well the rest of the time. I thought about it for a real second before I answered. "I think I could be," I said. He turned just enough to look at me over his shoulder. Something moved across his face. Relief, maybe, or something that sat right next to it. "Good," he said, and then, softer, almost to himself, "That matters to me." He left before I could respond. I sat in that empty conference room for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the door he'd just walked through, and understood with complete clarity that we were running out of road on this particular version of professional distance. Something was going to have to give. The only question was, who was going to let it? The email came on a Friday morning, just before 10. No subject line that would raise flags, no language that wasn't entirely appropriate. It simply said, "There's a restaurant on West 46th called Marison. I have a reservation tonight at 8. I'd like you to join me, not as a colleague. I understand if the answer is no, T. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop, went to the kitchen, made a coffee I didn't drink, and stood at the window looking at the street below for a solid 5 minutes. This was the moment. Not the bar, not the interview, not the conference room with its charged silences and careful distances. This was the actual moment where the road split and both directions had consequences. I thought about everything that could go wrong. The optics, the whispers that start quietly and build into something you can't contain. The position I'd worked for, the fresh start I'd needed so badly. I thought about Sandra, who trusted me, about the team I was only just beginning to earn. And then, because I'm apparently incapable of being entirely sensible, I thought about the way he'd said, "That matters to me," the night before, like it had slipped out before he could decide whether to let it. I replied at 11:15. 8 works. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing actual work, which deserves some kind of recognition because it required genuine effort. Marison was quiet and warm, the kind of restaurant that understands discretion without making it feel secretive. He was already there when I arrived, standing near the bar, and he looked different out of the office context. Less contained somehow, like the suit was the same, but something underneath it had loosened slightly. He smiled when he saw me. Not the restrained professional version, the real one. We were seated in a corner booth, which I suspected was not accidental. The conversation started carefully, and then, somewhere between the first course and the second, stopped being careful entirely. We talked about the company, briefly, and then, by unspoken agreement, not at all. We talked about other things. His family, originally from Nashville, a father who'd built the firm from 2 clients and a borrowed office. My mother, her health, the years I'd spent rearranging my life around someone else's crisis and not resenting it, mostly. He listened the same way he always did, completely, without agenda. At some point, he reached across the table and covered my hand with his, and neither of us made a thing of it, which somehow made it mean more. Walking out at 10:30, the city cool and unhurried around us, he stopped on the sidewalk and turned to face me. "I've been trying to do this the right way," he said. "I'm aware that's complicated given the circumstances." "It is," I said. "I know." He looked at me steadily. "I'm asking anyway." The words were simple. The weight behind them was not. I looked at him standing there, honest, uncertain in a way he rarely let show, asking for something without any guarantee, and felt something in my chest quietly stop resisting. "Then I'm saying yes," I said, "with conditions." The corner of his mouth moved. "Name them." The conditions were simple. Nothing at the office, no preferential treatment, no visible tension, no reason for anyone to look twice. Whatever this was, it lived outside those walls, or it didn't live at all. He agreed without hesitation, which told me he'd already thought it through. We stood on that sidewalk for another few minutes, talking through the practical edges of something that was entirely impractical. And at some point, the conversation slowed, and he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with the kind of unhurried certainty that made my whole argument about being sensible feel very far away. He didn't kiss me that night. I think he understood that the agreement we'd just made required some good faith, and showing up the next morning with clear eyes was part of that. He put me in a cab, closed the door, and stood on the curb until the car pulled away. I watched him through the rear window longer than I meant to. The next 3 weeks had a particular quality to them that I'd never quite experienced before. The strange, heightened feeling of having a secret that wasn't shameful, just private. At work, we were exactly what we'd agreed to be. Professional, measured, occasionally in the same room without the air changing noticeably. I was proud of both of us for that. Outside of work was different. Dinners, twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Long walks that started with a destination and ended somewhere else entirely. Saturday afternoon, he showed up at my building with coffee and no plan, and we ended up spending 4 hours talking on my couch like people who'd known each other for years. He was different in those spaces, still contained, still careful with words, but warmer in ways that surfaced gradually. A hand at the small of my back when we walked, the way he'd look at me mid-sentence when I said something that landed, like he was storing it somewhere. I was falling. I knew I was falling. I told myself it was manageable, that I was doing it with my eyes open, that knowing it was happening meant I had some control over it. That was probably not entirely accurate. The problem surfaced on a Tuesday. I was in the break room when I heard 2 people from the operations team talking in the hallway. Not about me, not by name, just a general, careless comment about how someone on the 31st floor had been seen leaving Marison with Tyler 2 weeks ago, and wasn't that interesting. I stood very still with my coffee cup and listened to 30 seconds of speculation that was mostly wrong, but not entirely. And then I walked back to my desk and sat down and stared at my screen. By noon, I'd decided I needed to tell him. By 2 o'clock, he'd already texted. "We need to talk tonight. I heard something this morning." I typed back, "I heard it too." His response came immediately. "My place, 7. I'll explain everything." The last part stopped me. Not the meeting, not the time. The last 3 words. "I'll explain." Everything implied there was something beyond the rumor that needed explaining. Something he hadn't told me yet. I put my phone face down on the desk and tried very hard to focus on work. I didn't manage it. His apartment was on the Upper West Side, 15th floor. The kind of place that felt lived in without being careless. Books on actual shelves. A kitchen that showed signs of use. A view of the park that on any other evening I would have stood at for a while. He opened the door before I knocked, which meant he'd been listening for the elevator. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Not professionally tired, personally tired. The kind that comes from carrying something for too long. He poured water, asked if I wanted anything else, and when I said no, he sat down across from me and didn't waste time. "Before anything else," he said, "I need to tell you something I should have told you sooner." I waited. When I sat down next to you at Arden that night, it wasn't entirely accidental. I felt something shift in my chest. He kept going, evenly, like he'd rehearsed the order of it. I'd had a long week. I go there sometimes when I need to think. I noticed you when I walked in. You were staring at your phone like it had personally offended you. The corner of his mouth moved, but he didn't let it become anything. I sat down because I wanted to. That part was just honest. I didn't know who you were. I didn't see your name until the next morning when my assistant sent over the candidate files. He paused. I almost pulled myself from the interview panel. "Why didn't you?" because removing myself would have required an explanation, and any explanation would have been worse than just being professional for 45 minutes. He looked at me steadily. I told myself, if you weren't the right candidate, it wouldn't matter. And then you walked in, and were the best person we'd seen in 4 months, and I had to make a decision. I sat with that for a moment. You could have told me, I said, before Marison, before any of this. I know. No deflection, no defense. Just those 2 words, sitting there, taking the full weight of what they meant. I appreciated the honesty. It didn't make the feeling in my stomach go away entirely. The rumor, I said. How bad is it? Manageable, right now, but it won't stay that way. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've been thinking about this all day. There's a position opening at a firm I have a strong relationship with, Callaway Group. Same level as your current role. Honestly, better suited to where your career should go. I could make an introduction. No pressure, no obligation. I looked at him. You're asking me to leave. I'm asking you to consider whether staying is actually what's best for you, he said. Not for this. He gestured between us. For you. Your work deserves to exist without this complication around it. It was a reasonable thing to say. It was also, underneath the reasonableness, the most vulnerable thing he'd offered me yet. A man who was willing to lose the convenient version of this to give me something cleaner. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him sitting there, honest and tired and trying, and felt the full weight of what I was actually deciding. It wasn't about the job anymore. It hadn't been for a while. I called Callaway Group on a Thursday morning, 3 days after the conversation in his apartment. Not because he'd asked me to. Because I'd spent those 3 days thinking clearly, maybe for the first time in weeks, and arrived at the same conclusion he had through my own route. The position was real. The introduction he made was professional and clean. A brief email that said nothing about anything except that I was exceptionally qualified, which I was. I had a conversation with their head of strategy on Friday afternoon that lasted an hour and felt like the kind of opportunity that doesn't show up twice. I accepted their offer the following Wednesday. I told Sandra first, which felt right. She was gracious about it, said the team would feel it, asked if there was anything she could do. I said she'd already done it by giving me the chance to prove myself, and I meant that genuinely. I told Tyler by text simply, I accepted. Start date is the 1st of next month. He replied within a minute. I'm glad. Are you? I thought about it, honestly, before I answered. Yes, I wrote back. I think I needed to get here on my own terms. You did, he said. That was always the point. My last day at Dunkan Meridian was a Friday. I cleared my desk quietly, said my goodbyes, and rode the elevator down for the last time, with the particular lightness of someone who is leaving something good for something better. He was waiting outside on the sidewalk. Not dramatically, just standing there with his hands in his coat pockets, like a man who had somewhere to be and had chosen to be here first. I stopped in front of him. The city moved around us the way it always does, indifferent and loud, and completely unconcerned with the two of us. You didn't have to come down, I said. I know, he said, and then he closed the distance between us and kissed me. Unhurried, certain, The kind of kiss that doesn't need anything from the moment around it, because it carries everything inside it. When we pulled back, he looked at me the way he had that first night at the bar, before either of us knew what any of it would become. "Dinner tonight?" he asked. "No conditions this time." I smiled. "No conditions," I agreed. We walked together toward the corner and turned into the city, and for the first time since any of this began, nothing about it felt complicated. It just felt like the beginning of something real. If you made it to the end of this story, it means everything to us. Drop your rating from 1 to 10 in the comments. We genuinely read every single one. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for coming back part after part. You're the reason we keep telling these stories. See you in the next one.